Billionaire CEO judged the janitor for pawning a violin. He then froze when his daughter played it. The boardroom windows gleamed with the morning sun as Victor Reynolds, billionaire CEO of a global tech empire, reviewed the latest reports. The numbers were strong, the projections promising, and every column of data lined up neatly exactly the way Victor demanded. His world was built on precision. He liked things sharp, efficient, flawless. To Victor, success wasn't luck, it was control. Control over time, over people, over outcomes. His empire was proof that discipline and vision could bend the world to his will. That was the standard he lived by. So when he overheard two employees whispering in the hallway that morning about the janitor pawning his violin, Victor couldn't help himself. He rolled his eyes with disdain. Pathetic, he muttered, though no one was listening. A grown man wasting time on music when he should focus on a real job. Victor thought of Harold the janitor, in his 60s, quiet, stooped, with gray hair thinning at the crown, the kind of man who slipped unnoticed into rooms, pushing his cart, sweeping the edges of the empire Victor had built. Harold always gave a polite nod, sometimes even a smile, though Victor rarely acknowledged it. To him, Harold was invisible, one of the many gears keeping his spotless world running. But to pawn a violin, Victor dismissed it as yet another tale of poor choices. He pictured Harold, clinging to sentimental nonsense instead of facing reality. Music didn't pay the bills, dreams didn't buy groceries. What Victor didn't know, what none of the employees whispering in the hallway now, was that Harold hadn't pawned the violin for himself. That violin had been his companion for decades. Harold had played it at weddings where brides wept and fathers proudly danced. He had played it in church basements, in small-town gatherings, in smoky bars where nobody listened but him. Its strings had once carried him through heartbreak and loneliness, through years of scrapping by. It was the last piece of himself that Harold still owned. And yet, when his daughter called crying that her little girl had outgrown her school shoes and the bills had left them with nothing, Harold didn't hesitate. He wrapped the violin in its worn case, walked to the pawn shop, and slid it across the counter. He told himself the music would forgive him. That evening, Victor came home to his penthouse, a temple of glass and marble perched above the city skyline. Luxury wrapped every corner. The air smelled faintly of leather and citrus. Everything gleamed. Everything spoke of power and perfection. But the moment the door opened, his daughter Emily came bounding toward him. 11 years old, her hair pulled into a loose braid, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She was holding something, an old violin case, the leather worn thin, the handle frayed. "Daddy," she said, her eyes sparkling, "look what I found at the pawn shop. Isn't it beautiful?" Victor arched a brow. "Emily, you know I can buy you a brand new violin, one carved from the finest Italian wood, with gold fittings if you like." She shook her head, clutching the battered case tightly. "No, Daddy, this one feels a broken bar special, like it already has stories inside it." Victor sighed. He didn't argue. He had learned that Emily had her mother's stubborn streak, and truth be told, he didn't have the energy to push back that night. Later, after dinner, Emily set the violin under her chin. Victor was scrolling through emails when he heard the first note. It was scratchy, uncertain, but then it steadied. And suddenly, the room filled with sound, not polished, not perfect, but alive. The melody ached, stretched, reached for something unseen. It carried warmth and sorrow in equal measure. Victor froze. Something about it gripped his chest. The music wasn't just sound, it was memory. He stared at the worn wood, at the faint initials carved inside the case, and realization struck. The janitor's violin, the same instrument he had mocked just hours before. And as Emily played, memories rushed back like an old film reel. He saw his childhood home, dim and cramped, after his father had walked out. He saw his mother humming soft lullabies as she patched their clothes late into the night. And he remembered their neighbor, an old violinist who played in the alleyway, filling the silence of their broken street with music. Victor remembered lying awake, listening, the notes raping him like a blanket against the hunger gnawing at his stomach. That music had carried him through. It had been hope, when the world gave him none. And now his daughter was playing that same violin. Victor swallowed hard, shame crawling up his spine. Hours ago, he had mocked Harold as foolish. And yet, here was his daughter, showing him the truth. The value of something or someone was never measured in money alone. The next morning, Victor didn't head straight to his office. Instead, he found himself outside the janitor's closet. The smell of cleaning supplies hung in the air. Harold looked up, startled, as Victor stepped inside. "Mr. Harold," Victor began, his voice softer than usual, "my daughter has your violin." The old man's shoulders slumped. He lowered his head. "Yeah, broken bar. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean for it to end up there. My granddaughter needed shoes for school. I thought the music would forgive me." Victor's throat tightened. "She plays it beautifully. And a broken bar. I judged you unfairly." "I'm sorry." The two men stood there for a long moment. The billionaire in his tailored suit, the janitor in his worn uniform, bridged by a story that neither could have written alone. Finally, Victor said, "Come with me." That afternoon, Harold walked into the penthouse, hesitant and nervous, carrying the violin Emily had begged to keep. Emily beamed, thrusting it into his hands. "Play with me," she insisted. Harold's fingers trembled as he lifted the bow. It had been months since he'd touched strings, yet the moment he drew across them, the room bloomed with sound. Deep, soulful, rich. Emily joined in, her young energy weaving with Harold's wisdom, and together their music filled the air. Victor stood frozen, his eyes burning with tears he hadn't shed in years. It wasn't just music, it was humanity, raw and unguarded. The janitor's sacrifice, the child's joy, the invisible thread of compassion binding strangers into family. In that moment, Victor understood wealth differently. It wasn't power or numbers or spotless boardrooms. True wealth was the ability to see people, to value their sacrifices, to honor the quiet heroes who gave everything, even when the world wasn't watching. From that day forward, Victor made changes. He established the Harold Fund for Music Education, offering scholarships for employees' families, ensuring no child went without books, instruments, or shoes. But more than that, he made smaller, quieter changes. Each morning, he greeted Harold by name. Sometimes they shared coffee before work. Sometimes Harold would stop by in the evenings, and Emily would beg him to play. Slowly, a friendship grew, unlikely, yet unshakable. And every evening, when Emily practiced, Victor paused his endless rush of emails and business calls to listen. The sound of that old violin, once pawned in desperation, now sang of redemption and hope. It reminded him of the lesson he would never forget. Sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the people we overlook carry the richest music of all.